Hello and welcome to revision video 5 of my revision videos relating to USA, A Nation of Contrast, 1910 to 1929. Today we're going to be looking at key question 5, the end of prosperity. So, as always, if you could get these headings down for me, either in spice diagram form or in note form, we're going to be looking at all of these today: overproduction, falling consumer demand, booming land and property values, overspeculation, and the Wall Street crash, including panic selling, Black Thursday, and market crash. As always, I'm going to suggest that you pause the video at this point to get these down, and I'm going to emphasise again to make sure that you are using not just this video for revision, but any of your other resources as well. So, you can split the reasons for the end of prosperity into long-term reasons and into short-term reasons. Now, some of the long-term reasons, as this diagram shows, is commerce, overproduction in agriculture, which, as we looked at last video, had been happening for quite a while, a fall in the demand of goods, property prices, overproduction, and too many small banks as well was one of the problems. So, first of all, we're going to look at overproduction. So, overproduction, basically, fewer products such as cars are being sold. Henry Ford had made the car so cheap that at some point, as always, it's going to get to a point where everybody's got a car. Nobody needs cars anymore. And this is partly caused again by overproduction. They'd produce more goods than Americans could actually afford to buy as well. They could not sell many goods abroad because of obviously the Fordney-McCumber tariff that we looked at last lesson. Foreign countries had retaliated to that by putting really high taxes on American goods. So they struggled to sell goods outside countries as well. Sales fell and bosses cut prices and cut wages. And when this didn't work, they cut their losses by sacking their workers. And this meant fewer workers with less money to buy goods. So factories cut costs and more people lost their jobs. So wages are cut because sales fall. People have less money, so they don't buy things. This makes things worse. People then lose their jobs. They've got even less money again to buy things. And it's just this vicious cycle, all caused by the fact that Americans and the factory owners, business owners, overproduced their products. There was too many for the Americans to take on. And like I said, it does get to a point where everybody's got a Hoover, everybody's got a fridge, everybody's got a cooker. We can't afford to buy new ones. So, fall in demand for those luxury consumer goods that we talked about as well. There was a massive unequal distribution of wealth. The Roaring 20s, as we looked at last revision video, was not shared by everyone. 50% of American families actually had less of an income than $2,000 a year, which was the minimum they really needed to survive. And they couldn't afford to buy these consumer goods. Some manufacturers did not see there was a limit to what could be bought, so they just continued to produce goods, and the result was overproduction. The USA couldn't sell its surplus products to other countries, as we discussed. Some of these European countries, because of the First World War, owed the USA lots and lots of money and were really struggling with the repayments as well. Germany in particular was really struggling with its repayments, as Germany was going through a process of inflation and didn't have any money itself, so it couldn't afford to pay Britain and France back, who then couldn't afford to pay America back. Germany had also lent money from America, and they couldn't afford to pay that back either. The US government had put high tariffs, as we've already discussed, in the 1920s, and the foreign governments responded by doing the same. US banks had lent money to several European countries as well, and then these countries found it really hard to pay back loans in the 1920s. There's a boom in land property values as well. The increased wealth in the 20s caused a really dramatic rise in the value of land and property. Florida in particular, is a bit of a holiday destination, witnessed a sharp rise in land values, with many speculators attempting to buy property or land. People borrowed really heavily to do so as well, and then couldn't afford to pay it. And in 1926, property prices then began to fall as well, and this left many homeowners in negative equity. So prices had gone so high in Florida, for instance, that people would buy something, say, for $50,000, and then when prices start to fall, this property would then only be worth $30,000, and so they'd be $20,000 in negative equity. So they couldn't sell it, and it was worth a lot less than they paid for it. This was a warning, really, but again, it was ignored by a lot of investors and ignored by a lot of people. So the short-term causes we're looking at is things to do with the stock market plummeting, loss of confidence, and a really sudden fall in prices and overspeculation. So during the 20s, more and more Americans bought shares in the stock exchange, and the process kept rising. It wasn't specialists, it wasn't people that knew a lot about it that bought stocks and shares. It was your average American person that was buying it. They didn't really know much about what they were buying. And because of this, stocks started to rise and rise and rise up to 1928. And in 1928, they didn't rise as much as previous years because many companies weren't selling as much, and because of that, their profits fell. So, for instance, if you in this country, if I could take an example now, if you bought stocks in Tesco, and the more stuff that Tesco sells, the more money that you've got in your stocks and shares. So if you decide to pull out your stocks and shares when Tesco is at optimum value, you're doing a lot of money. But if you left it in there and then Tesco stopped selling as many things, your money would ultimately go down as well because Tesco wasn't making as much money. And that's what happened essentially in 1928. People lose confidence and there was a little bit of a drop. This was a warning that things were going to go pear-shaped. But when they started rising again, greed took over and speculation started again. So people started putting money in stocks again. There was a complete lack of regulation encouraged, which encouraged more speculation. So there was no regulation on how many stocks you could buy. There was no regulation on what people were doing, how people were selling these stocks, what people were buying stocks and shares on credit. So they were using their credit cards to buy shares. So the money wasn't even there. And what would happen is they would buy these stocks and shares with their credit card. And then obviously the bank would take this non-existent money because it was a credit card. The banks would then lose money because the money wasn't actually there. The person whose credit card it was is then in lots and lots of debt. The stocks fall because the money isn't there. The person owes lots of money and can't pay it and so falls into debt as well. And it was just this vicious cycle of people buying things on credit. Successive presidents really stuck to laissez-faire as well. So this idea of laissez-faire, looking after yourself, the government are not going to intervene. The three presidents that we've discussed in previous videos really stuck to that. In 1927, the market value of the stock market was 27 billion, but by October of 1929, it was actually 87 billion. So there was a lot of money there, but that means obviously there was a lot of money to lose when it crashed as well. So easy credit. Growth of credit made it easier to buy goods, even though they did not have enough cash to pay for them on the spot. It arranged for customers to pay in instalments on hire purchase. This included buying on the margin, which we've already discussed. Buying shares on credit, always a bad idea. Further encouraged by easy credit policies on the part of the Federal Reserve Board. So there was no regulations in place saying that this person has failed to pay credit before, so they can't have credit this time. There was nothing like that. If you wanted credit, you could have it regardless of your history. It worked well when prices were rising. However, when they started to fall and people started losing money, this is when the problem set in. 75% of the purchase of price shares were borrowed, which created artificially high prices. So 75% of the shares bought were actually bought on credit. So this was artificial because the money wasn't actually there. And the high prices were artificial as well. Now, at this point, what I would like you to do is pause this video and pause me, and I'd like you to go to this link because this is a really wonderful video. It really gives you a really good idea about the Wall Street crash. So if you could, at this point, pause the video, go to this link for me, watch it, take some notes down. It'll really give you a good idea about the Wall Street crash. So hopefully now you've watched that video and you've got a bit of a better idea, and we can talk about panic selling now and the immediate effects of the Wall Street crash. So in autumn 1929, some experts start to sell their shares before their values fall even further. Small investors, so your everyday people that have been buying stocks, panic and they try and rush to sell their own. This leads to a complete collapse of prices, thousands of investment loss of millions of dollars. It creates a complete and utter crash on Wall Street because everybody pulled their stocks out at the same time. Shareholders begin to panic then. So this is what we're looking at with regards to a timeline. So shareholders begin to panic in October the 19th, 29. They start heavily selling on their shares on the stock market. 6 million shares bought and sold on the 21st of October. Things start to recover a little bit on the 22nd of October. But then panic sets in again on the 23rd. 2.5 million shares sold in the last hour of trading. More and more people trying to sell their shares and get out of the stock market because they're afraid. Black Thursday then, Thursday the 24th of October 1929. This is a terrible day on Wall Street. Prices have fallen so quickly and people have rushed to sell their shares. 13 million shares have been traded. Gets a little bit better then on the 25th of October. Bankers meet at midday. They support the stock market and prices start to steady and things look okay. President Hoover then speaks And he assures all Americans that the panic is over, and that banking will recover and everything will be okay. But unfortunately then, on Monday the 28th, the panic returns and there's a lot of heavy selling again. 3 million shares sold in the last hour of business and prices fall dramatically. Black Tuesday, the 29th of October, a really significant day, the worst day ever to this day even, on the stock market. 16.5 million shares traded, shares lost all value. Many shareholders lose absolutely everything. They lose all of their money, all of their life savings, and suicides are reported. So that's the worst day, and it is the worst day to this day on the stock market. So what were the immediate effects of when the Wall Street crash happened? So by the end of 1929, there's about 2.5 million people then unemployed in the USA. This did only amount to 5% of the workforce, and some felt that the country would see the crisis out, but confidence had died, and the people that did have any money left were really unwilling to spend. Unemployment gathers pace, and there's fewer and fewer consumer goods being bought and sold in retail prices, in retail outlets. It actually halves in the years between 1929 to 33 the amount of goods sold in retail stores. All of a sudden, the USA is a land of unemployment, tramps, bread queues and soup kitchens. Many people are evicted from their homes, they live on the streets, they lose their life savings, and it's the time of the hobo. Thousands of men travel the country, they hitch rides on rail cars and freight wagons, and it creates an utter depression in the USA. So people were not buying goods, and even the rich began to economise. Employers lay off employees. The depression was not caused by the crash, as we've looked at. There was lots and lots of things contributing to the Wall Street crash to start with. The country was heading. The country was heading for a depression even before the Wall Street crash, because of people buying things on credit, because of overproduction, because of all of these things. So the Wall Street crash didn't cause the depression, but it was a big factor in it. Again, the issues in the economy in the 20s are very vital in understanding what was wrong with the US economy at that time. The crash did, though, speed up the approach to the depression, and its effects were catastrophic for the next decade. Stockbrokers are unable to pay their debts to the banks, and because of this, the banks go bust as well. Thousands of people who'd saved in the banks end up bankrupted, workforces were laid off, credit is collapsed, loans are taken in. Those banks that survived were willing to make further loans. Speculation and risk-taking is gone. Nobody does that anymore. Farmers are probably hit one of the worst. They lose their farms and they carry placards attacking the president. One slogan became extremely popular: "In Hoover we trusted and now we are busted." And actually a lot of people ended up homeless and lived in slums that they actually called Hoovervilles because of the president. That the president got a lot of the blame for this. Not only is America suffering, but there's that lovely common phrase, when America sneezes, Europe catches a cold, and this creates a depression not just in America but across Europe as well. And we see unemployment in Britain, we see unemployment in France. Germany in particular has a horrific depression during this time, and a lot of it stems from the US economy, because the US had lent out so much money that it called in its debt, so it bankrupted the rest of Europe. And again, it caused a depression globally, really, not just in the US. And that's it for key question 5. I will see you next time for key question 6. Thank you very much.